Hello, I'm Harry Riley. Welcome to Harry's Tales. This one's called The Christmas Seance, and it's a ghost story by Harry Riley. The characters in this story are fictional, and resemblance to anyone living or dead is entirely coincidental. Sidney Hardcastle sat in his office at the Ministry for Immigration and pondered on life's woes. He was feeling sorry for himself. When he started this job 10 years ago, it had held so much promise, and yet here he was, going absolutely nowhere. He had no chance for promotion, and now the new government had come in, everybody was judged by results. It was all targets. Junior regulators like him were treated worse than door-to-door salesmen. He was already middle-aged, going fat around the waist from too little exercise, and his hair was turning grey. His wife was a snob. He insisted on keeping up with the Joneses. He worked all hours, but she spent money faster than he could earn it. He was fed up and wanted out. Sidney was not a good judge of human nature, couldn't tell when anybody was spinning him a line. He'd made mistakes too, letting in gang leaders and murderers. He looked at the clock and thought, oh hell, another 4 hours to go. Will there be no end to this boring misery? He just sat there waiting for something to happen. And then whoosh! His office chair was empty and he'd vanished. Mary, Martha, Betty and Barbara were 4 little old ladies who met up at one another's house for tea and a slice of cake every Sunday. They'd been doing this for as long as any of them could remember, and it had become a ritual for them. All 4 were widows, all 4 were lonely, and all 4 wished for a nice young man to make them young again. On this particular day, they'd caught up with the gossip, much faster than usual, and they sat drinking tea and munching cake, each trying to think of something interesting to say, and it wasn't easy. And then Betty's eyes lit up. She addressed Martha directly. You used to be a sort of a medium act. Why don't we hold a séance and try and make contact with our lost ones? You know, just the 4 of us. Martha pulled a face that could turn milk sour and got decidedly sniffy. I was a genuine medium, and it was not an act. I just put on a bit of razzmatazz to wake people up. And to pay the bills, put in Barbara helpfully. Yes, that's right, agreed Martha, now that her true stature had been recognised and explained satisfactorily. Well, asked Betty, are we going to do it then? They persuaded the reluctant medium to clear the table and pull up chairs, linking hands. Martha demanded absolute silence while she concentrated, and insisted they keep their eyes shut. She had not done this for several years and was somewhat rusty. After intoning, is there anybody there? In a low, solemn voice, several times and getting no response, she was all for calling it off and making another pot of tea. When she heard a man's voice call out from the armchair, her favourite armchair by the fireplace. Oh, for God's sake, not again, this is the 3rd time this week. One by one the old ladies opened their eyes and gazed at one another fearfully, and then looked to where the voice had come from. And there, sitting upright in Martha's favourite chair, was a stranger, a grey-haired, middle-aged man. He was looking ill at ease and just a little bit cross. He spoke up angrily. Why do you people have to keep meddling? I'm in enough trouble as it is. My bosses think I'm deserting my post on purpose. I've had my last verbal warning. Another mistake and I'm redundant. Barbara was first to regain her composure. Who asked you to come anyway? We only wanted our husbands back. The stranger sighed and thought it best to introduce himself. Well, you got it wrong. You brought me and I'm Sidney Hardcastle. He'd made this explanation many times before after being spirited up by incompetent mediums, and now he spat it out like a well-rehearsed speech. I'm a regulator, a junior immigration officer for Her Majesty's government in the 4th dimension. It's my job to interview all people coming across at the moment of death, to establish their religion and social background, and to send them on to their relevant stations, heaven or hell, or in limbo with us. And you are wasting my time. The widows were not impressed. They didn't see much of a price for all their efforts, and they just stared at him in silence, wishing him gone. But it was not going to be as easy as that. Sidney was thirsty, and spotting the teapot he asked for a drink. Quite strong, please, and no sugar, and perhaps a slice of cake? Martha glared at him sternly from under the brim of her feathered hat. She always wore it when conversing with the other side, as she felt it added a bit of gravitas. Oh, all right, he could have his tea. He looked a bit down at heel and in need of sympathy. Her friends began to relax and started firing questions at him. Hold on, one at a time, please. While supping his tea, he went on to tell them a bit about his life, his wife, and his job, and then he dropped a bombshell. One of them would have to go back with him, or he would get the chop. I'm sorry, ladies, but you must see my position. I didn't ask to come, and I need to prove I've not been slacking. One of you must have a dicky or be about to peg out from a stroke. You all seem clapped out. Can't you help me here? Martha was the dominant woman in their little club, the queen bee, and she was not going to lose one of her members without a fight. And how many brownie points will you get for introducing a poor widow woman with no means of support and having to rely on state benefits? Think on, Sydney. Could be the last straw for you. Is this the time to be looking for another job? It was checkmate. Their unwanted guest looked longingly at the chocolate cake on its shiny gilt stand and asked if they had any other ideas. Betty had a kind heart and she passed him a plate, loaded with sticky cake, which he tucked into ravenously. Delicious. I haven't had cake like this since I passed over. Mary nearly knocked over her cup in excitement. I've got it. You can have the mayor. He would be a worthy prize for you to return with. He's overweight, has a hernia, drinks like a fish, and what with his pacemaker. You could take him away and do everybody a favour. She cackled with laughter and her eyes were alight with enthusiasm for the project. And after that, who knows? You could keep coming back and we could help you find more deserving souls. Her three companions laughed joyfully. Sydney began to think that the day was taking a turn for the better. Could you really do it? It sounded too good to be true. They all looked to Martha, the brains, for inspiration. She pondered for a moment and then perked up. I know. A sudden shock ought to do it. He'll be throwing the ceremonial switch on the town's Christmas lighting tomorrow night. That would be the ideal time to put out his lights. For good. The other women gleefully agreed. This was just the sort of excitement they had been hoping for. To add a little sparkle to their lives. Martha waved a finger about as she thought out the details of the plan. We need someone to unearth the electric, so when he touches the switch, our worshipful mayor gets a worshipful volt right up his worshipful... She let the rest of the sentence hang in the air for effect, and the effect was electric. Sydney eagerly joined in the discussion, offering his assistance to a mouthful of cake. That's something I can do. Nobody will see me. I'm invisible to everybody else. I can set it up today. Betty was concerned. Won't you be missed? Sydney smiled. I often travel when I get a call at the office to attend a deathbed emergency. As long as I don't return empty-handed, I'm okay. In the fourth dimension, we live parallel lives to yours, but on a different time scale. The sun and the moon control our working lives, and fire and water mean different things to us. For instance, fire can't harm us, and we breathe easily underwater. His listeners were awestruck, and Mary confessed she had never learnt to swim. It was time to break up the party, and Sydney said he would be standing by the side of the mayor at the ceremony, but they wouldn't know who was there. The official group stood on the platform and posed for photographs. The Lord Mayor looked resplendent in his robes and tricorn hat and chain of office. I hereby declare... He raised his hand and grasped the handle of the big red power switch. A tremendous bang and a vivid flash of incandescent light flooded the night sky. It seemed Sydney had worked his magic. On Christmas Eve, the four ladies gathered for their usual meeting, but on this occasion there was no time for idle chatter. They had to convene another séance, and invoke Sydney again as arranged. Linking hands and closing eyes, they urged Martha to go through the motions. 4 times she asked, "Is anybody there?" And then 4 times more. In fact, she continued asking until she was positively exhausted. But Sydney never came. They were bitterly disappointed. It was time to give up and make some tea. Sydney had let them down. It was Mary who broke the silence over a cuppa. I felt quite strange when I woke up this morning. I ran the bath as usual and was so relaxed I nodded off and woke up to find I had slipped completely underwater. But the strange thing was that I could breathe. I was breathing perfectly naturally underwater. Martha, Betty and Barbara looked at one another and confirmed that they too had shared a similar experience. They weren't where they thought they were. The dotty old ladies had discovered reverse polarity in the 4th dimension. Sydney sat in Martha's favourite chair and smiled. They couldn't see him. End.